There is a field in Holmes County, Ohio that has not been fertilized in 63 years. No nitrogen, no phosphorus, no potassium, no herbicide, no irrigation line. The family that farms it has never bought a bag of fertilizer in 3 generations, and the soil in that field tests at levels of organic matter that the Ohio State University Extension soil scientists who visited it in 2019 described as essentially impossible for a farm that had been in continuous crop production since the Civil War. When I asked the farmer how the soil stayed that way, he pointed at a pile of black char near the back of the barn and said 3 words. "We make this. That pile of black material is called biochar. And what the Amish have been doing with it for 2 centuries is the same thing the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin discovered 4,000 years ago, and the same thing that a $2 billion global soil science research program has been trying to replicate in laboratories, the same thing, on a farm in Ohio, made from scrap wood in a metal barrel, for free. This video is about the compound that makes it, the system around it, and the reason a $280 billion fertilizer industry has spent decades making sure the land-grant universities were instead teaching your local farmers to buy more bags of synthetic nitrogen. The average American who grows any food at home, a garden or a raised bed, spends $240 a year on soil amendments. Fertilizer, compost, and pH adjusters are purchased every season because the soil keeps needing more. Synthetic fertilizer does not build soil. It feeds the plant while bypassing the soil biology entirely. The soil biology starves, the organic matter declines, the water retention drops. The Amish farmer has not bought a soil amendment in 3 generations. His soil gets better every year. His yields are stable without inputs. In the drought of 2012, when neighbors lost 40% of their corn, his field produced within 5% of its normal yield. No irrigation, just soil that held the water because the biology was intact. The difference is a black powder made from scrap wood. The reason most farmers have never heard of it goes back to 1947 and a budget decision that redirected science toward synthetic chemistry. Biochar is produced through pyrolysis. You heat organic material, wood, or agricultural waste in a low-oxygen environment. Instead of burning to ash, it converts to a stable carbon structure. Under a microscope, it looks like a building with millions of chambers, all made of stable carbon that will not decompose for hundreds to thousands of years in soil. That structure is the key to everything. 1 gram of quality biochar has a surface area of up to 400 square meters, not 400 square centimeters, 400 square meters. The surface area of an entire tennis court compressed into a piece of material. Every one of those microscopic chambers is a potential habitat for soil bacteria, fungi, and the network of mycorrhizal relationships. Every one of those chambers is a potential storage site for water, for nutrients, for the microbial communities that make nutrients available to plants. Synthetic fertilizer bypasses all of that. It delivers nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in soluble form directly to the root zone. The plant absorbs it. The soil biology gets nothing. Over time, the soil biology declines. The organic matter gets depleted. It is the agricultural equivalent of feeding a patient through an IV line while their digestive system atrophies. Biochar reverses that process. In 2 to 3 years of consistent application, soil shows measurable increases in microbial biomass and water retention. The average yield improvement in degraded soils was 25%. In the best performing soils, the numbers were considerably higher. But before I take you to the Amazon, I want to tell you about a man named William Albrecht. William Albrecht was the chairman of the Soil Science Department at the University of Missouri from 1938 to 1959. His research documented the direct relationship between soil biology and human health outcomes. Soil biology determined the mineral density of the food, and then, as synthetic fertilizer became the dominant paradigm in the mid-1950s, his work was gradually marginalized, not disproven, marginalized. By the time he retired in 1959, the trajectory of American agricultural science had moved decisively away from the soil biology framework. The Amish never trained their farmers in that model. They kept building soil the way Albrecht's research said soil should be built. Now I need to tell you about the Amazon. In the 1960s and 1970s, archaeologists exploring the central Amazon basin began finding something that contradicted everything they believed about the region. The Amazon has famously poor soil. The thin, highly leached laterite soils support the forest only because it recycles its own nutrients so efficiently. Remove the forest, and the soil fails immediately. That is why deforested Amazon land becomes degraded pasture within just a few years. But in patches across the basin, archaeologists found something different. Dark, dense, extraordinarily fertile soil that went down 3 to 6 feet. They called it terra preta. When scientists analyzed it, they found extremely high organic matter, calcium, phosphorus, and large quantities of stable charred carbon, charcoal intentionally incorporated by ancient farmers. The dark earth was not natural, it was manufactured. Indigenous farmers discovered that incorporating charred organic material created a permanent fertility that did not deplete. The research program built around terra preta is called Biochar agronomy. It has produced over 3,000 studies and attracted funding from major global foundations. The Amish did not read those studies. Their ancestors brought a version of the same knowledge to Pennsylvania and Ohio in the 18th century. The Amish kept the practice because it kept working. They continued burning scrap wood in metal barrels and incorporating the char into their fields every fall. In 1947, the USDA redirected federal research funding towards synthetic inputs. Post-war chemical manufacturers needed a peacetime market for nitrogen-based explosive capacity. The Haber-Bosch process that produced nitrogen for bombs was identical to the process for fertilizer. The only thing missing was a market large enough. The USDA provided the market by restructuring its extension guidance around synthetic fertility management. University research programs were funded to develop crop varieties optimized for synthetic nitrogen inputs. Extension agents were trained on synthetic fertility systems and sent into farming communities with guidance built entirely around purchased inputs. The farmers who were making their own fertility from scrap wood and compost and biological management were not told their systems were wrong. They were simply surrounded by a system that assumed they would buy inputs and provided no support for the alternative. Within one generation, the knowledge of how to build soil biologically had been largely replaced in American agricultural practice by synthetic fertility knowledge. The yield numbers went up immediately. The soil biology numbers, which nobody was measuring, went down. The dependency on purchased inputs was established, and the $280 billion global fertilizer industry was built on a foundation of soil systems that could no longer function without it. Between 1948 and 2022, the United States federal government provided approximately $370 billion in agricultural subsidies. The majority flowed to commodity crops, corn and soybeans primarily, grown using the synthetic input model established after the war. The subsidy structure was designed around the synthetic model. Crop insurance was designed around synthetic input yield expectations. Price support programs were calibrated to synthetic input cost structures. A farmer using biological soil management and biochar incorporation had soil that produced differently. The system rewarded the synthetic approach and made the biological approach economically invisible, not forbidden. Invisible. The farmer who built his soil naturally could not access the risk management and price support tools that his synthetically farming neighbor used. The invisible hand of the market was wearing a government-funded glove, and it was pointing one direction. The Amish did not participate in federal subsidy programs. They farmed their own land, managed their own risk, and built their own soil. While American agriculture became structurally dependent on synthetic inputs, the Amish built a system that needed neither. 60 years later, an Ohio State soil scientist saw the result and described it as essentially impossible. It is not impossible. It is patient. Soil is not a medium you grow plants in. Soil is a living system you build a relationship with. Feed the system, and the system feeds your plants. Deplete the system, and you spend the rest of your farming life compensating for what you destroyed. Now let me show you exactly how to build this system. This applies whether you have 60 acres or a 600 square foot backyard garden. Making biochar at home requires three things: dry organic material, a metal container with a lid, and fire. That is the entire equipment list. The simplest production method is what is called a top-lit updraft gasifier, which is actually a metal barrel with holes drilled near the bottom. You fill the barrel with dry wood scraps, corn cobs, or wood chips. You light the material at the top. The fire burns downward. Low oxygen conditions prevent complete combustion. Instead of producing ash, the material converts to char. When the visible smoke from the top changes from white or gray to nearly clear, the conversion is complete. You seal the barrel with the lid to cut off oxygen, and let the char cool completely before opening. What you have inside is biochar. A 55-gallon metal drum with a fitted lid produces approximately 15 to 20 gallons of biochar per burn. At an application rate of 5% by volume to garden soil, 15 gallons of biochar treats approximately 300 square feet. 1 burn per season, 3 to 4 burns over 3 years. And you have fundamentally changed the long-term fertility of that garden. Before you incorporate the biochar into soil, there is one step that most home guides omit: charge the biochar. Raw biochar incorporated directly into soil can temporarily tie up nitrogen because the enormous surface area will absorb soluble nutrients. During that window, plants in the amended zone may show nitrogen deficiency. You avoid this entirely by charging the biochar before incorporation. Charging means soaking the biochar in a nitrogen-rich liquid before it goes into the ground. Compost tea or liquid from a compost pile. Soak the char for 24 hours, let it drain, then incorporate. The charged char enters the soil already populated with microbial life. The Amish farmer in Holmes County does this in October. He burns his fall wood scraps and agricultural waste in the barrel. By planting time in May, the char has had 7 months to integrate. The microbial colonization is established and water retention is measurable. 3 generations of soil improvement on the same ground. That is what an Ohio State soil scientist drove 3 hours to see in 2019. It is not impossible. It is patient. Soil is not a medium you grow plants in. Soil is a living system you build a relationship with. Now, the second component of the Amish soil system addresses the other major limitation of degraded American soil: compaction. Compacted soil sheds water rather than absorbing it. It resists root penetration and forces plants into shallow root systems. The Amish remedy for compaction is a combination of deep-rooted cover crops. Specifically, the daikon radish, also called the tillage radish. The radish root penetrates deep into compacted soil. When it dies in winter, the root decomposes and leaves a channel for water and air. 1 season of tillage radish followed by biochar creates conditions where roots can access the full depth of the soil profile. The combination works the same way the combination of lime and radiant barrier worked in the roof cooling video. 2 mechanisms addressing the same problem from different directions simultaneously. The radish opens the soil physically. The biochar colonizes it biologically. Together they rebuild in 2 to 3 seasons what synthetic inputs and mechanical tillage degraded over 30 years. There is a third element in the Amish soil system that is completely absent from any modern soil program you will find: worm castings, produced on site from kitchen and farm waste, in a system that runs year-round with no electricity and no mechanical equipment. The Amish maintain a worm bed stocked with red wigglers, earthworms optimized for processing organic waste rather than burrowing through mineral soil. Kitchen scraps, vegetable trimmings, coffee grounds, paper, and farm waste go in. Worm castings come out. Worm castings are a complete biological inoculant. They contain every major class of beneficial soil microorganism, bacteria, fungi, and nematodes. You are adding a living community of organisms that will process the nutrients already present and make them available to plant roots. The interaction between worm castings, biochar, and tillage radish root channels creates what soil scientists call a biological hotspot. Together, they establish the conditions for the mycorrhizal fungal network, the underground web of fungal filaments that connects plant roots. Synthetic fertilizer destroys mycorrhizal networks. The soluble nutrients make the plant's relationship with mycorrhizal fungi unnecessary. Biochar, worm castings, and cover crop root channels are that intervention. They restore mycorrhizal network density to levels of undisturbed native soil. 155-gallon drum for biochar, $20. Scrap wood, free. Radish seed and red wigglers, another $40. Total annual investment is under $30 after the first year, against $240 for amendments that degrade your soil. Over 10 years, the conventional approach costs $2,400 and leaves soil that is more dependent on inputs than when you started. The biochar system costs $500 over 10 years and leaves soil that is measurably more fertile and more water retentive. It's more biologically active than when you started. One approach builds an asset, the other builds a dependency. The fertilizer industry sells the dependency. The Amish built the asset. Now let me tell you how this scales down to the situation most of this channel's audience is actually in. I know the majority of you are not farming 60 acres. You have a backyard, a garden bed, or a strip along a fence. You have a lawn you are sick of mowing that you wish was growing food instead. The biochar system does not require scale. It requires consistency. A single 55-gallon drum burn produces enough char for 2 to 3 raised beds. A kitchen-scale worm bin produces enough casting to inoculate that same garden area twice per season. Tillage radish planted in September, turned in December, opens the soil profile for spring planting. The entire system fits in a backyard, costs under $100 to establish, and builds soil that gets better every year. I want to address one objection from people in northern climates. They say, my growing season is too short for cover crops. In Zone 4 and 5 climates, the tillage radish needs to be planted by mid-August to produce a root before the ground freezes. That means planting the garden around the soil building timeline rather than planting the soil building around the garden. That mental shift is the hardest part. In the synthetic model, soil is a substrate. In the biological model, soil building is the crop. The Amish have thought this way for 200 years. Their gardens are planned around the soil, not the other way around. For those in the driest climates, the biochar effect on water retention is even more dramatic than in the humid Midwest. Research in New Mexico documented biochar amended soil, retaining 17% more plant-available water than unamended control soil. In conditions where irrigation is expensive, 17% more retention is the difference between a crop that survives July and one that doesn't. The Amish principle applies in Phoenix as precisely as it does in Holmes County. The barrel and the char are the same. The physics of a carbon lattice holding water against gravity is the same at sea level and at 5,000 feet. That is the whole system. Biochar from scrap wood, worm castings from kitchen waste, tillage radish from an $8 seed packet. Incorporated together in the fall, given time to work. 60 years of that rhythm, and you have a field that's essentially impossible. 3 years of that rhythm, and you have a garden that needs no purchased inputs and produces food with more mineral density. Drop your state and your soil situation in the comments. I want to know where you are starting. The next video addresses what to do when you have no land at all, live in an apartment, or just have a balcony. The Amish answer is not what you expect. It's older than farming itself. Stay close.